April 27, 1945, Camp Ruston, Louisiana. The steam rising from the metal cup carried a scent that Oberhelferinnen Greta Hoffmann hadn't experienced in 6 years. Her hands trembled as she brought the dark liquid closer, inhaling deeply. Then tears filled her eyes. The American sergeant looked confused. "Mom, it's just coffee. You okay?" Greta couldn't explain that she wasn't crying from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that everything she'd been told was a lie. This wasn't Ersatzkaffee, the bitter brown water made from roasted acorns that Germans had choked down since 1940. This was real coffee, genuine imported beans, served freely to enemy prisoners. The aroma spoke of a nation so wealthy it could give enemies what its own citizens couldn't obtain. Through the window, she could see American soldiers consuming identical coffee without thought, discarding half-filled cups, treating as ordinary what Germans considered precious beyond measure. What Greta and the 1,247 other German women held as prisoners of war in the United States were about to discover was that coffee was merely the beginning. Within weeks, these women captured from Wehrmacht auxiliary units would experience a transformation that would make them witnesses to democracy's secret weapon. Not bombs or tanks, but the casual plenty of a society that could waste more than Germany could produce. By 1942, genuine coffee had vanished from German civilian life. The Allied blockade meant no Brazilian beans, no Colombian harvest. What replaced it, Ersatzkaffee, represented German resourcefulness turned desperate. Acorns gathered from forests and processed to remove bitter tannins became the primary ingredient. Chicory root, roasted barley, even dandelion roots, all roasted until black, ground into powder, and marketed as coffee substitutes. Greta Hoffmann, before her service as a Luftwaffe communications specialist, had worked in her family's bakery in Cologne. She remembered when real coffee disappeared in early 1940. Her mother cried quietly that first morning, stirring the acorn brew, understanding what it meant. Germany was cut off. The blockade was working. Promises of quick victory were lies. Every morning's bitter cup reminded them. The propaganda ministry tried to reframe the deprivation. Ersatzkaffee was healthier, they claimed, better for German constitutions than exotic foreign stimulants. But no propaganda could make roasted acorns taste like Brazilian beans. Wehrmacht rations for women auxiliaries included Ersatzkaffee as standard. Even in occupied France, where stockpiles of seized coffee sat visible in warehouses, auxiliaries received only grain substitutes. Real coffee was reserved for senior officers and party officials. The women who would become America's prisoners came from diverse backgrounds. Oberhelferinnen had joined Wehrmacht auxiliary services, operating communications equipment, managing supply logistics, serving as nurses. As Germany collapsed in early 1945, thousands found themselves trapped. When American forces overran positions, they captured entire support infrastructure, including women who had never expected captivity. The decision to transport female POWs to the United States came in late March 1945. Ships returning from supply runs would carry prisoners rather than sailing empty. Among these were 1,247 German women, mostly auxiliaries. The Atlantic crossing provided the first indication that American abundance operated differently. The ship's mess halls served meals exceeding German civilian rations substantially. Breakfast included actual eggs, not powdered substitute. White flour bread, not the dark bread mixed with sawdust Germans called war bread. And coffee, served in large urns, unlimited refills available. Helferinnen Margarete Schmidt recorded in her secret diary, April 2nd, 1945, aboard ship. They served coffee, real coffee. I could smell it across the mess hall. When I finished, an American sailor asked if I wanted more. More. I thought it was mockery, but he simply poured another cup. By the third day, I stopped trying to make it last. They have an ocean of it. The casual abundance created cognitive dissonance. They watched American sailors pour coffee, drink half, then pour fresh cups, discarding the remainder. This wastefulness would have been prosecuted in Germany. Coffee aboard American ships was constantly fresh, never reheated. A pot sitting 30 minutes was discarded and replaced. The arrival at New Orleans in mid-April revealed an America that contradicted every propaganda narrative. Lights blazed despite wartime, cars moved freely, civilian life continued without apparent privation. Processing facilities had coffee urns at every station. The trains to permanent camps featured dining cars serving hot meals with coffee available continuously. Camp Ruston featured wooden barracks with electricity, indoor plumbing, and mess halls with industrial kitchens possessing equipment German restaurants would have envied. Commercial coffee percolators produced 50 cups at a time. That first morning, April 27th, when Greta inhaled the steam and wept, hundreds of other German women felt simultaneously. The smell triggered memories of childhood, of peacetime, of Sunday mornings before everything collapsed. But it also triggered understanding that Germany had lost civilizationally. A nation serving real coffee to prisoners possessed power beyond military might. Sergeant James Crawford from Detroit had simply followed procedure, brewing coffee at regulation strength using the weekly allocation. That allocation, £12 per 100 prisoners per week, exceeded what entire German towns received monthly. He watched German women approach the urns tentatively, taking small cups, sipping slowly, many crying quietly. The camp interpreter explained what Ersatzkaffee was. Crawford's response entered the administrative log. Jesus Christ, they've been drinking acorn water. Make sure they know they can have as much as they want. The concept of unlimited coffee couldn't be immediately grasped. They continued taking small portions until American personnel literally forced them to understand abundance. Crawford began serving larger cups, then demonstrating by pouring out half-full cups and refilling them fresh. The message was clear. We have so much that we waste it to ensure quality. Within a week they understood. Coffee was not rationed, not limited. The mess hall served it 3 times daily and provided continuous availability in the recreation hall. Weekly coffee delivery consisted of dozens of 50-pound bags, quantity that would have supplied a German city for a month. Americans treated these deliveries as routine, just another commodity. The coffee represented quality Germans had forgotten. The army purchased beans from multiple sources, Brazilian Santos, Colombian Supremo, blending them for consistency. Germans, even pre-war, had extended coffee with chicory. Here, prisoners received pure coffee, ground fresh daily, brewed properly. Helferinnen Elsa Brown wrote, May 5th, 1945. I've been drinking real coffee for 8 days. I'd forgotten what it tastes like. Complex, bitter, but not harsh. The Ersatzkaffee was simply bitter, one-dimensional. Now I understand what we lost. The transformation of daily routine around coffee revealed its psychological importance. Morning became anticipated rather than dreaded. Women gathered in groups, drinking coffee, conversing, experiencing normalcy through simple pleasure of decent coffee. American personnel encouraged it. The recreation hall's coffee station became the social center. Administrators authorized coffee availability 16 hours daily, recognizing its role in maintaining morale. This understanding that small comforts mattered demonstrated American prisoner management philosophy. The contrast with German treatment of prisoners became conversation topic. They had seen Allied POWs in Germany, knew the conditions. Soviets had been starved systematically. Western Allied prisoners faced deprivation. Americans were feeding German prisoners better than German soldiers ate. This reversal challenged Nazi propaganda fundamentally. They'd been taught Americans were weak, decadent, culturally inferior. Yet these supposedly inferior people had captured them, transported them across an ocean, and now provided daily luxuries. The cognitive dissonance created by sipping excellent coffee in an enemy prison camp while Germany collapsed forced re-evaluation of everything. Beyond coffee, the mess hall revealed abundance everywhere. Meals included fresh vegetables daily, meat 4 times weekly, milk with every meal, fresh fruit twice weekly. Ice cream appeared regularly during summer. White bread was standard, not the dark wartime bread mixed with sawdust. Butter was real butter, not margarine or cold derivative ersatz fat. American surplus showed in every meal. Portions exceeded German rations substantially. Seconds were available. Food waste occurred because supply exceeded consumption. The canteen where prisoners purchased items with work wages stocked goods emphasizing the disparity. Coca-Cola cost 5 cents. Chocolate bars filled shelves at prices German workers could have afforded pre-war, but represented wartime luxury. Cigarettes were abundant, 2 packs for a quarter. Work assignments brought women into direct contact with American civilian abundance. Women picking vegetables on farms saw mechanical harvesting leave behind more edible produce than German farms produced total. Tomatoes, peppers, beans left rotting because mechanized agriculture made hand harvesting uneconomical. Oberhelferinnen Marie Fischer wrote, May 20th. Today, I worked at a cotton gin, processing more cotton in 1 hour than my entire village could have handled in a month. The farmer owns multiple tractors and has electricity. His workers, including Negro workers, ate lunch containing more food than German workers received weekly. This is their normal. Coffee served at work sites reinforced abundance. Farmers provided coffee breaks, hot coffee in thermoses, served freely to workers including prisoners. Some brought commercial urns to fields. This casual extension of comfort to enemy prisoners demonstrated attitudes Germans found incomprehensible. Interaction with Americans challenged propaganda. The women had been taught Americans were individualistic, selfish. Instead, they encountered voluntary cooperation exceeding German forced obedience. Church groups brought donations, organizations sent Christmas packages, families sometimes invited prisoners to dinners. Coffee served during these civilian interactions carried symbolic weight. American housewives apologized if coffee wasn't fresh enough. Women receiving this hospitality, who had drunk roasted acorns for years, couldn't explain that any real coffee was miraculous. By June 1945, with Germany's surrender confirmed and Nazi atrocities emerging, the psychological impact deepened. The women learned about concentration camps, about industrial murder, about the regime they'd served. This knowledge, combined with daily American decency, created profound moral confusion. The enemy they'd been taught to hate was treating them with kindness. The government they'd served had committed unspeakable evil. Coffee became part of processing this trauma. Women gathered drinking coffee, discussing in hushed German what they'd learned, how to reconcile their service with the regime's crimes. The American coffee represented an alternative to the Nazi system of scarcity and control. The camp newspaper began discussing Germany's future. A June 1945 essay titled What Coffee Teaches used coffee as metaphor. Germany forced its people to drink substitutes while promising future glory. America gave even enemies the real thing today. Which system understood human needs better? American education classes accelerated transformation. Voluntary courses in English, American history, and democracy were well attended. Women taught American democracy was chaotic weakness, discovered it created prosperity. German efficiency couldn't match. Coffee served during classes became pedagogical tool. Democracy creates abundance benefiting everyone, even enemies. Summer 1945 brought intensified contact through movies. Hollywood films revealed America contradicting Nazi teaching. Women watched casual wealth, diversity, individual freedom, recognizing that what they lived as prisoners approximated what they saw on screen. Coffee in diners, food in abundance, ordinary people living well. Most significant were supervised visits to American towns. Selected cooperative prisoners went shopping under guard. They entered diners where coffee was served in bottomless cups, refilled automatically, charged 10 cents regardless of consumption. They saw grocery stores with multiple coffee brands, pounds of beans available without ration cards. Helferinnen Anna Zimmerman wrote, July 8th. We visited Monroe, Louisiana today. At a diner, I ordered coffee. The waitress refilled it continuously, no additional charge. I drank 4 cups. Around me, Americans drank coffee, read newspapers, talked casually. This was Saturday morning routine. They had no idea they were living in paradise. American Christmas 1945 brought emotional climax. Church groups sent packages including coffee. Most significant was the camp administration gesture. Christmas morning, the mess hall served traditional breakfast including unlimited coffee from fresh brewed urns. The symbolism was intentional, Christmas representing peace celebrated by giving plenty to former enemies. Greta Hoffman wrote to her mother December 26th, Yesterday, our captors served Christmas breakfast with real coffee, unlimited quantities. I thought of our last Christmas together in 1939, when we still had real coffee on Sundays. These Americans who owed us nothing gave us what our own government stole. They proved the enemy was never external, it was the regime that made us poor while promising to make us great. Repatriation began early 1946. Women faced return to destroyed homeland with mixed emotions. They had been transformed, experienced abundance, learned alternatives to Nazism existed. They packed knowing they would face scarcity again, but understanding it was political choice, not inevitable fate. Final breakfasts at Camp Ruston in early 1946 carried particular poignancy. The mess hall served coffee as always, but women understood this might be the last real coffee they'd taste for years. Germany in 1946 was starving, dependent on Allied aid, with coffee a luxury beyond civilian access. They savored final cups, knowing they were returning to Ersatzkaffee, or worse. American personnel ensured each returning prisoner received a care package including 1 pound of ground coffee, a gift from captors to captives acknowledging shared humanity. The women boarded ships at New Orleans in February 1946, carrying these packages, containing more real coffee than Germans could obtain through any means. Return to Germany shocked them despite preparation. Destruction exceeded imagination. Cities were rubble, infrastructure destroyed. Food shortages meant rations below survival. The coffee they carried became precious beyond measure, shared with family members who hadn't tasted real coffee in 6 years. Margarete Schmidt returned to Hamburg in March 1946, finding her family's home destroyed, her parents living in a basement room. She recorded the morning she made coffee for her mother, March 15th. Today, I made real coffee for Mutti. First she'd had since 1940. She cried drinking it, saying it brought back memories of life before the war. I told her about America, about the abundance. She didn't believe me at first. No nation could be that wealthy, she said. But I showed her the empty bag the Americans gave me. Her face showed what I had felt, understanding that we had been lied to about everything. Women returning from American captivity became informal ambassadors of truth. In Germany, saturated with propaganda about American decadence, these women brought first-hand testimony that contradicted official narratives. The coffee they'd consumed freely, the abundance they'd witnessed, the decent treatment they'd received, all challenged the lies sustaining Nazi ideology. The contrast between American treatment of German prisoners and German treatment of Allied prisoners became public knowledge through these testimonies. They had seen how Americans treated enemies, knew how Germany had treated them. The moral comparison didn't favor Germany. This knowledge spread, creating foundation for reconstruction based on democratic principles. Occupation authorities recognized returned female POWs as valuable for re-education. Women who had experienced American democracy, who had seen abundance created by free systems, became speakers at community meetings. They described their experiences, always including the coffee story, because coffee symbolized the difference between systems better than abstract theory. Greta Hoffman worked with the American Friends Service Committee, speaking about her captivity. Her standard presentation began with coffee. I was captured in April 1945, expecting harsh treatment. Instead, they gave me real coffee, unlimited quantities, better than German officers could obtain. This coffee taught me we had been lied to about everything. Americans were not our enemies. Tyranny was. They proved it with every cup. The Marshall Plan's announcement in 1947 gained acceptance in Germany partly through testimony of returned POWs who had witnessed American abundance. When politicians claimed America couldn't afford such aid, returned prisoners countered with observations of American surplus. The coffee they'd drunk validated promises of American assistance. The economic miracle of the 1950s in West Germany brought return of consumer goods, including coffee. When coffee reappeared in stores in 1948, returned female POWs recognized it as milestone. Coffee availability in German shops after 8 years symbolized recovery and return to civilized life. Anna Weiss wrote in 1950, "Today I bought real coffee at a market in Munich, Brazilian beans, same type I drank as a prisoner in Louisiana 5 years ago. I sat drinking it while remembering. The Americans taught me that abundance was possible, that societies could create plenty rather than scarcity. Now, with American help, we are rebuilding Germany on those principles. Every cup reminds me of what I learned in captivity." Women maintained correspondence with American personnel they'd met. Greta Hoffman wrote to Sergeant Crawford every Christmas for 20 years, thanking him for kindness shown, crediting his coffee with beginning her transformation. Crawford responded faithfully, expressing pride that simple decency had created such impact. In 1985, 40 years after war's end, a reunion was organized in Washington for former German POWs and their American captors. Attendees included 17 women from Camp Ruston, including Greta Hoffman, now 68, and Sergeant Crawford, now 71. The reunion featured breakfast with coffee, real coffee, brewed fresh, served unlimited. The symbolic completion brought tears again, now tears of reconciliation. Greta spoke at the reunion, her English perfected over decades. "I was 28 when I became your prisoner, frightened and indoctrinated with lies. The first morning, Sergeant Crawford served me coffee, and I cried. I cried because the smell reminded me of childhood. I cried because I understood everything I'd been told was false. America was not weak. America was strong enough to show mercy, wealthy enough to give plenty to enemies. That coffee began my journey from Nazi to Democrat. Sergeant Crawford gave me more than coffee. He gave me hope that civilization still existed." Crawford, characteristically modest, responded, "I just made coffee, Mom. Same coffee we all drank. I didn't know it would mean so much. But that's what America is about, treating people decent, sharing what we have." The historical significance has been studied by scholars examining re-education success. Research identifies practical experience of American abundance as more effective than formal propaganda in changing attitudes. The coffee story appears repeatedly in interviews as a symbolic moment of transformation. The smell of real coffee after years of substitutes created emotional opening for broader re-evaluation. Dr. Arnold Kramer, leading historian of POWs in America, wrote, "Female German prisoners experienced the same abundance as male prisoners, but reacted with additional emotional intensity because women had managed household scarcity on the home front. They had stretched rations, made substitutes, performed the daily labor of making do with less. When confronted with American plenty, they understood both practically and emotionally what it meant." The coffee story encapsulates this perfectly. Women who had roasted acorns and pretended it was coffee found themselves drinking the real thing freely in enemy captivity. The contrast destroyed Nazi propaganda more effectively than any words. The return of coffee to German civilian life marked psychological recovery. Coffee consumption in West Germany grew from near zero in 1945 to second highest per capita in Europe by 1960. This coffee culture, rebuilt with American aid and inspired by returned POWs' testimony, became marker of German participation in Western prosperity. The last of the Camp Ruston women passed away in 2019 at age 98, Margaret Schmidt, who had kept her diary throughout captivity and published it in 1995 as memoir titled Real Coffee and Other Miracles, A German Woman's American Captivity. It became a bestseller in Germany. Schmidt's final interview in 2018 returned to the coffee theme. "I'm 97 years old, and I still remember exactly how that first cup of American coffee smelled. It's the clearest memory of my life. That coffee was more than a beverage. It was proof that another way existed. We had been told scarcity was inevitable, that sacrifice was necessary. The Americans proved all of it false. They had abundance, and they shared it with enemies. That generosity changed my life and changed Germany. Today, the site of Camp Ruston is a residential area with no remaining buildings. But the local historical society maintains a small museum documenting the facility's history, including the story of German women held there. Among exhibits is a vintage Silex commercial coffee percolator, the type used in the mess hall, next to a display of Ersatzkaffee containers showing what Germans drank during the war. The contrast tells the story more effectively than words. The museum's centerpiece is a reproduction of Greta Hoffmann's diary entry, enlarged to poster size. The entry from April 27, 1945, reads simply, "Today, I drank real coffee for the first time in 6 years. I cried from the smell alone. The Americans who owe me nothing gave me what my own government stole. This coffee tastes like freedom." The story of German women POWs and American coffee represents profound truth about soft power and cultural victory. Military defeat forced Germany's surrender, but American abundance converted German hearts. The women returned carrying testimony that democracy created prosperity, that free societies outperformed dictatorships civilizationally. The coffee that made Greta Hoffmann cry in April 1945 was simply Sergeant Crawford following army procedures, brewing standard-issue coffee. He couldn't have known that this routine act would initiate transformation in a young German woman's worldview. He couldn't have predicted that the smell of real coffee would prove more effective at destroying Nazi ideology than any propaganda campaign. The 1,247 German women held as POWs in America became witnesses to abundance, testifying through their return that the enemy possessed systemic superiority. The coffee they drank freely in captivity, the food they ate abundantly as prisoners, the decent treatment they received despite being enemies all proved alternatives to Nazism existed and succeeded. In the end, the smell of coffee, real coffee, not acorn substitute, carried a message more powerful than words. It said societies organized around freedom could create abundance benefiting everyone, even former enemies. It said democracy wasn't weakness, but strength, that sharing wasn't defeat, but victory. Greta Hoffmann, drinking her first cup of American coffee on April 27, 1945, couldn't articulate all this in that moment. She simply inhaled the steam, tasted the genuine brew, and cried. But in those tears lay the beginning of transformation, personal and national. The Nazi warrior became democratic citizen, the enemy became friend, and the prisoner became witness to the power of abundance over scarcity. That cup of coffee, and the hundreds of thousands that followed for 1,247 German women over months of captivity, accomplished what military victory alone could not. It proved America had demonstrated a better way. The women carried this knowledge home, spread it through family networks, testified to it in re-education programs, and helped rebuild Germany on principles they'd learned as prisoners drinking American coffee. Today, when Germans sit in cafes drinking excellent coffee, few remember that this simple pleasure was once impossible, that an entire generation drank substitutes and pretended. Fewer still know the story of women who rediscovered real coffee as prisoners in Louisiana, whose tears over the smell of genuine brew marked the beginning of Germany's redemption. But the lesson endures in archives, in memoirs, in the museum at Camp Ruston's former site. The smell of coffee, real coffee, not acorn substitute, changed the world one cup at a time, one converted heart at a time, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapons are not bombs or bullets, but simply the generous act of brewing good coffee and sharing it with those who need it most. The story that began with Greta Hoffmann's tears in April 1945 ended with her testimony in 1985, with Margaret Schmidt's memoir in 1995, with the final survivor's interview in 2018. But the meaning continues, a reminder that abundance generously shared defeats ideology more effectively than force, that kindness to enemies can transform nations, and that sometimes a cup of real coffee speaks louder than any propaganda about the difference between systems that create plenty and those that create only lies.